next up, we have Pramod Shinde from Josh Software. He's a Ruby on Rails developer, and he likes to play football. He likes to do outdoor activities like trekking and football. So welcome, Pramod.
My name is Pramod Shinde, and I work for Josh Software. Today I will be speaking about APIs in Rails. Essentially, I'll be sharing my learning experiences so you will not get lost while developing APIs. In this talk, we will see three key factors about building APIs. First one is what are APIs, why we need APIs, and how to build APIs in Rails. So let's start with what are APIs. It's nothing but the set of routines, protocols, or tools for building your software applications. In simple words, it's a connector between application, data, and device where your consumer requests to the server and server returns a response. But in Rails, APIs are RESTful. When I say RESTful, this does not mean sitting on couch and building APIs RESTfully. It's a client-server architecture with resource that can be created, updated, deleted, or listed. And for each resource, there is a uniform resource identifier, which is accessed over a uniform interface like HTTP. And all communication is done by a representation of a resource. And it's all about communicating and modifying some state of the resource. So for example, let's say client request to the server with a HTTP action, resource identifier, and a presentation needed in a response. As requested by a client, server returns a representation in requested format. So why we need APIs? Typically when we have a situation like this, where your service is consumed by multiple clients. And in technical terms, your web service is used by multiple browsers, devices, or applications. So how to develop APIs? In Rails, there are various options for building APIs. The first two options comes to our minds are GrapGem and RocketPad gems. But both these gems have legacy code, and they have their own DSL, or you can say own rule for building APIs. And the third option is with Rails, with structured controllers and namespace routes. And the fourth one and the highly recommended one is Rails API gem. So why Rails API gem? It's a Rails without some middlewares. When I say without middlewares, these are not all middlewares. It has, in this gem, some view-related middlewares are removed. And it is specially developed for API-only application. Where API-only application means where you don't have assets, views, and helpers. And it just shipped with Rails 5. So to get more idea about this gem or a Rails 5, when you develop your application with Rails, traditionally your application controller gets inherited from application controller base module, where it has all the middlewares needed for a full stack applications. And on the other side, your application controller is getting inherited from application controller API module. To understand this better, and with great respect for both these ladies, say this, where your base module has more asset-related middlewares, and on the other side, you will get a slimmer infrastructure for your building APIs. So how to develop API-only app? The first, with the Rails API gem, with Rails-new command, and with Rails 5, just use our traditional Rails new command, but with --API option. Once you have a API-only application, the next thing you want to make your APIs feature rich. By adding, by versioning your APIs, by adding authentication to your APIs, or putting some throttling on your APIs, and documenting and testing your APIs. So let's see why we need versioning. Because of two simple reasons. You don't want to break your existing version of your API. And the second thing is you want to add some feature to your APIs. And in versioning, it's always true that your version 2 is more improved version than your version 1, just like this. Believe me, I didn't find better analogy for versioning better than this. So how to version your APIs? We have a gem called Versionist, which offers to specify your version in 3 ways. One in your headers, and the second one is prefixing to the path slug of URI, and the third one in request parameters. So let's see all 3 strategies one by one. The first strategy is in headers. In this strategy, Versionist adds some constraints on your router by module name, header, name, and value. And your header something will look like this when you opt for this strategy. The second strategy is passing your version in URI path. Here also you can see it got constrained by module v1 and path value, and your path will look like this. And third and last strategy is passing your version in parameters. Here also you can see it got constrained by the module name, parameter, name, and value. And finally looking URL will look like this, where it's sending version in parameters. So out of these 3, which is the recommended strategy for versioning your APIs? So the recommended strategy is passing version in your headers like this. Here the idea is to make your resources, resource URLs independent of, they should not accept version or something related to authentication. It just identifies your resource. So let's say add version 1 controller and version 1 to your APIs. Versionist comes with a Rails generator command, new API version, which it takes version name and module for your versioning. And the strategy you can see I am opting for headers by passing name and version. It also comes with a simple Rails generator command like new controller, which it taking which is accepting the controller name and the module name for your version 1. So after you generate version 1 and the controller, your router file will look like something like this, where it got constrained by module v1 and header name with version 1. And the next key thing is, if you notice, there is a default true option. It's not default by there. It's not default. You have to add it explicitly. Whenever it's necessary, whenever you want to serve your all API request using this version, that is a default version, whenever your client does not pass any specific version to your APIs. And the resources for version 1 goes here. After that, let's see how your controller, version 1 controller and its response will look like. You can notice here, version 1 users controller getting inherited from version 1 base controller. And for responses, I am using active model serializer. While developing APIs, you might want to control the fields that are being served to the client in the responses. So here, active model serializer comes to the rescue and offers a clear layer between your model and controller. And if you can see, the first namespace user serializer will look like this, where I am controlling my fields that are going in the response of the API. So let's add version 2 to the APIs with similar looking commands but updated options, and one controller in version 2 module with similar command. After that, your routes will look like something like this, with a separate block for module V2 and same strategy, and the resources for version 2. Now version 2, let's see version 2 controller response and how it is getting inherited. If you notice, version 2 users controller is getting inherited from version 1 users controller. This is very important, like if you want to support a backward compatibility for your previous versions. And I am just only overriding the methods that I want to update in my version 2. If you notice, I am using separate namespace serializer for version 2, which will look like this. And I am updating the response field that I needed in the updated version of my API. Once you generate your version 1, version 2 controller, and the whole router file will look like this, where each module have a separate router constraints, and it's generating the routes for respective versions. And your controller directory will look like this with application controller, which is getting inherited from application controller API module, and the directory will look like this. It got structured under version 1 module and version 2 module. So after that, after versioning, let's see our next feature addition to the API, that is authenticating APIs. Authentication is a key when you are building APIs, and your API should generate unique key for each client or a user using some secure encode decode algorithms, and it should have a mechanism to regenerate your API key if it gets compromised, and it should be transferred securely between your client and the server. And that provided or encoded API key should be validated on each API call. So let's see how to generate a key. In simple way, many Rails developer opt for this way using secure random Ruby module, because it is easy for implementation, recommended for small scale applications, and you might want to store this in database as it is not a computed token. And the second way to generate API key, and which one is a recommended one, using JWT, that is JSON Web Token, which offers you decode your payloads. If you notice, our payload should have some key information about user, so that you can identify your resource depending on your payload. JWT gives you a computed token against some secret key. It also allows you to expire your payload after specifying after some time or a unspecified time. So let's see how to generate a key. For key generation, I have built a simple service class, which is decoding this payload, encoding this my payload using Rails secret key base and the payload given, and I am getting encoded API key back. And for decoding, I am using same Rails key secret base and getting my payload back. So you can identify your users from that payload. So once you generate API key, the key question is how to accept API key in APIs. So first, and the simpler approach is accept your API key in resource URL. And the second option, which is a highly recommended one, you should accept your API keys in headers just like this. So that was about generating and accepting API key. Now you want to authorize your use request using API key. So let's see. Before authorizing your request, you have to provide auth create or a user login APIs. So you can get that encoded API key in response. Here I have created sample login API, which is keeping authentication and just checking user email and password and returning a encoded API key in the response. And while accepting this encoded API key in application controller, I am authenticating my each request, API request by setting current user or rendering unauthorized response. And I'm decoding my API key, which is received in headers, and setting the current user. If you notice, I am also handling expiration and a decode error exceptions. So your client should get appropriate messages. So after authentication, the next thing is you want to throttle your APIs or put some limit on your APIs. So throttling is nothing but like controlling your request depending on some criteria. So what are the deciding factors that your API should have throttlings? First deciding factor is when you have a large user base application, and second, you want to control your request traffic depending criteria like account subscription or time interval like request limits per hour, per month, or per seconds, per minute. And the most important is you want to prevent your APIs from the attacks like DDoS or a brute force. So let's add authentication to our APIs. Here also I am using simple service using Redis, where I'm setting default limit of 5 for past key, and before each API call, I'm just incrementing its value and checking whether the limit is reached or not. So how to use this service in our APIs? In application controller, if you look, before each API request, I'm just checking whether API limit is reached or not. If yes, just returning the response code like too many requests and with appropriate messages. So that was about throttling. So next key thing about APIs is documentation and testing. The first thing to note about APIs is your first API consumer is another programmer who is developing front end for your APIs. And if that programmer starts scripting about your APIs are not working, then you should have some documentation or documentation to which you can point that programmer so he will not creep. For documentation, there is one gem, Aspect API documentation, which is very widely used for documenting your APIs, which offers you to generate API documentation using simple rec command, and it offers developer to test your APIs. While testing your and writing acceptance testing, aspect like acceptance testing, it generates a document for your APIs. So it's like testing and documentation generation is happening at the same time. That is a main advantage of this gem, which has a large community support also. So this gem just generates a JSON format for your APIs, API responses. To read this JSON format, it supports two viewers. First one is Radox. That is a Sinatra app where you don't have much customization to generate the documentation. And the second one is Epitome gem, which offers great flexibility and features like you can generate single page or a multi-page documentation for your APIs. It builds on Bootstrap 3 and offers a simple command to initialize the configurations, and it copies your documentation assets to your public directory, so you can show the documentation to user. After these 4 key points, you can say my APIs are reachful APIs. Means like I have implemented each and key factor of the API. You can say it's a complete API application, or it's a close to complete API application. So the next thing about APIs is your API responses should be consistent. Your API client should get clear message what your backend server is saying. So that message can be propagated to the client, and that can be propagated to user. So it should not be like miscommunication between client and server. There is another image I removed from the presentation for a blog content, which Gautam advised me to remove that image. If you want to see, I will show you after my presentation. So I have built one small demo that what we talked about in last 20 minutes. Let's see how you can see that. Let's see some action. Here I am using first login API with version 1 with user email and password and getting API key, which will be used in my version 1 users API. See, I'm passing in headers version 1 and API key and getting the response for my version 1. You can see this response. Now let's see same API version with version 2 with same updated version parameters and the updated response for my first API. And see the throttling. We using version 1. I am in response setting my current daily limit and remaining daily limit in response headers. See, this is decreasing by each request, and when it reaches, your API response is like too many requests reached. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Pramod? Yeah. There.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I want to talk about, like, is there any way that we can use Rails API with the normal Rails project, normal Rails project, so that, like, there are the scenarios where we have a web application as well as the API we have to publish. So is there any way, so like the API shouldn't have that much of load like as the web application have?
So you have a setting web application which is rendering your HTTP responses, right?
Correct.
And you need to like see how it is currently architected. So if it's your business logic is sitting outside of your controller, then you can include this Rails API gem, and the first thing you need to say that your application is API only in application controller by setting API only application, and just inherit your new that you are replicating same for APIs, right?
No, I'm saying, like, in the same project, can we use the Rails API as a separate part of the project, but in the same Rails application?
Yes, of course. You have to create one extra module which will serve your API request, and you can define your routes if the request is coming for APIs, and you can serve your JSON responses from a separate controller.
Okay, but the models are same.
But yeah, models are same. You have to architect like that, so you can reuse the codes from both places, like from existing as well as from the new controllers.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other question? Okay, so thanks Pramod. That was
Thank you.
awesome talk.